tell me a bit more about your filmmaking in terms of the projects that you are, you're interested in working on, gives you the most pleasure to work on, and just in general, what's your connection with this sort of art form, as you've mentioned?
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah. So the films that I do are kind of expressionistic explorations of different human, capacities or different human endeavors, like psychological, political, emotional. And so they're more sort of, I like to do like, installations and kind of site specific installations for films. So last year, for example, I did an installation in an art center in a place called Arbonne, Switzerland. So it's called the Kunsthalle Arbonne. And there was a room there that I did an installation specifically for. So I shot a film that I shot in several locations around the world, a bit in New York, a bit in Estonia, a bit around CERN. And this kind of came together. And the thing that I edited together, the main projection was almost like more like a visual poem than anything. So it's kind of like different city streets and how these things come together, and it sort of builds in a kind of visual narrative, but not a traditional narrative, but a sort of visual narrative. And there were some other channel films that I put on the wall as well in this little room. And so, these are films that are exploring, for me, I was trying to explore themes of, loss and human meaning, right? Because these are the concept of human meaning is completely valid for art and for psychology and for emotion and for, the humanities especially. And so, that's the kind of thing that I like to do. I'm also really interested in humanity's relationship to technology, right? As a scientist myself, and as a person who deals with a lot of, I don't know if I would call myself a futurist per se, but I'm a person that is very interested in technology and the future of technology and how, what is humanity's evolving relationship with technology. And so I like to explore this too from a more visual perspective. I haven't really gotten into I've done a little bit with, sort of like AI based things, but nothing really, it's not really that interesting to me. I'm more sort of an old school filmmaker where I like to use the, framing and montage to have the weight of the meaning rather than, sometimes gimmicks or tricks that are sort of like AI based or something like that. Again, there's some great art that's being made with those tools, but it's not really a thing that I do. So yeah, I don't know. It's a long way of saying that I like to do these sorts of visual poems, visual, impressionistic or expressionistic, depending upon the perspective, examinations of a lot of different types of human emotions. It's hard for me to describe. I mean, without, it's like trying to describe a painting on a podcast, right? It's like, well, okay. kind of just have to see it yourself.
Yeah. Is there a specific place, where we can find your movies?
No, they're not really online. Like I said, they're sort of site specific installations, and then they wouldn't be anywhere else. If there are enough hours in the day, there's like a million projects that I'm working on. There's one big one that I'm working on that might get shot. Hopefully we'll shoot in 2024. And then there's a few other smaller pieces that I would love to put into a gallery show at some point. But again, I just have to find the time to make that happen. These would be sort of, I'm interested also in, because I used this TikTok account for a while. At first as a filmmaker, right, the notion of shooting something special with, for the portrait mode was insane. I'm like, oh, I hate portrait mode as a filmmaker. But then I'm like, okay, how could I take this as a challenge? And I kind of started to get into this notion of, how can we use that in an artistic sense to challenge people's, or take advantage of a lot of people's expectation to interact with visual media from the portrait mode as well. So I like to, so I would love to, I have this sort of gallery show that I'd love to put together that has sort of like portrait mode films in very large screens and kind of matched together with some other pieces as well. But yeah, unfortunately, none of this stuff is really online. I mean, there's a few stills that I put into some of my, I put a page on my website that I think is just jvbeacham.com/films. And I kind of just put like a list of some of the major ones that I've done over the years. And there's not that many, but it's something that there's a few more coming up.
Amazing. And
provided I can find enough time to do everything.
Yeah. And finally, I just love to hear that from you as well. What would you say are your main influences in terms of filmmakers or painters and even writers? I would love to hear, like, the names and the sort of art that is influencing you and that has affected you.
Oof, that could be a very long list. So film, I don't know. Lots and lots of people have influenced me. Luis Buñuel, Ingmar Bergman, Martin Scorsese, Jean-Luc Godard,
Yes.
Maya Deren, Tarkovsky, Fellini. There's a lot of people that have influenced me over the years, and hundreds of others. Stanley Kubrick, people like this. So that are really interested in the very meaty philosophical issues of their time, and also the larger philosophical issues of existence. I find myself drawn to those. I'm also drawn to a lot of movies that have a very clear, or at least a subtly clear, political attitude too, because I think it's, again, both science and art are inherently political, because everything is political, right? It's like, if someone says something that's like, keep politics out of it, that's a political statement. And so it's important to, even science, the entire discussion we're having here, right? The undercurrent of it about all the scientific stuff is, and if a lot of the stuff that I talk about that I explore in art too is, what does, in this notion of humanity's relationship to technology, what does the research that we do in science, and these big projects like CERN or, Human Genome Seq project, things like this, what do these say about our priorities as a society, and what kinds of questions could we ask to interrogate our priorities as a society to see where they've gone wrong? I don't know. Authors, that's a long list too. Yeah, like Camus, Sartre, and
nice.
Angela Davis, hugely influential on me. Dostoevsky. Let's see, who else? James Joyce. This is a tough one because there's so many writers. Marilyn Robinson.
The French connection there with Camille and Sartre. So amazing.
I mean, but of course, Kafka is a huge influence on me, and I don't know that this could go a long distance. I'll just tell you what the most recent things that I've read. For example, I've read. I'm still in the process of reading The Dawn of Everything. The last book by David Graeber before he died, and his co-author is named David Wengro. This is fantastic because they're basically, throwing over this sort of this erroneous notion that we've been taught in schools about how human civilization progressed in one sort of like linear sense, right? It's like we started as hunter-gatherers, and then agriculture was invented by magic, and then that led that we had to, we could store food, and so we could live together. But then when you live together, you need laws, and that's led to things like this and democracy, and the Enlightenment was the perfect, and like so linear. That's nonsense. That's not how human civilizations progressed at all. They went in fits and starts. There's lots of examples from antiquity of societies that would experiment with different ways of living, right? There's nothing inevitable about the current version of capitalism that's dominant around the world. So this is a fascinating book. I just reread The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. And that's great. I read a biography of Marcel Duchamp by Calvin Tompkins, I believe. Anyway, so kind of all over the place. I recently finished the novel G by John Berger, which is really great. So amazing. I don't know. Painters, we could also go for a very long time. So let's.
Because I'm also very much into art, and you've mentioned a couple of things that got me to the idea where you're really into. I can imagine you're into like Impressionism and Monet and Renoir and all of these guys. But, the classic.
But also contemporary art. I mean, I'm obsessed with people that are trying to expand the notion of painting to from not so much the sort of like this sort of like zombie figuration stuff, but people like, I like anybody else, I like a lot of the Gerhard Richter stuff. And and I've been interested in a lot of other contemporary painters